Hello there. Welcome to episode 65 of GameSpot GamePlay. I'm your host, Kevin Van Ord, and we're glad to have you back. We're glad to have the other two people in the studio back. This is an interesting week because everybody's really, really busy either getting ready for GDC. Tom can't be here. Sean's getting married. What's that all about? He's going to Greece. So it's a skeleton crew today, and therefore a day where we're not going to be too worried about the usual structure of this podcast. We're just going to talk, and we're going to talk about games, which is something that we love. So let me introduce the people in the room with me. Justin Haywald is sitting right across from me.
Hey, I like to think of myself as the rib bone. The rib. You said the skeleton crew. So I would have made a different joke, but I decided to keep it clean, and I'm the rib bone.
Oh, good. I'm glad that that's the bone you went with. Carolyn Pettit.
Hi, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Doing all right.
Good.
Yes.
Good. It's good to have you here. Benito is behind all of the stuff. Can he show? There he is.
Benito!
Hi. Benito is taking care of the things, the cameras, the soundboard, all of those things. Good to have him here, and it's good to have all of you out there. If you're in the Twitch chat, I am looking at the chat from time to time, so say hi, ask questions. We would love to have your input and your participation in today's podcast because I come in with no real agenda. I don't come in with any.
Kevin, you always have an agenda.
That's true. I'm here for the game agenda.
Unlike Frozen.
That's right. That's right. Frozen has an agenda, which is delighting people young and old across the nation. So, hi.
Hello.
So there's a lot of stuff that's been going on this week. A lot of, two major games come out, two widely acclaimed games that came out. And those would be what?
Well, so we had Titanfall and Dark Souls 2 as the standout titles.
Oh my God! I didn't know that one, Justin. You took
Darn
it. You stole it.
But there are There are just a lot of good games this month. I do not look forward to thinking about Game of the Month at all. South Park Stick of Truth has been one of my favorites. That's been taking up a lot of time.
I will argue against that one.
I like that game a lot, but I would argue against that.
I don't think I can't see that standing up among games like Titanfall and Dark Souls 2.
Giants.
Yeah.
And it is going to come down to Titanfall and Dark Souls 2. I'm sure once we have these arguments next week. Are you guys one way or the other?
Coming.
There are more games, but based on that so far, Shovel Knight was delayed. It is not going to come out this month. I'm very sad.
What about Goat Simulator? When's that coming out?
That's still, I think, April 1st.
Oh, man.
I do not. I mean, I actually have not yet started up Dark Souls 2. So
Titanfall is the best.
No, definitely. I mean, I've really enjoyed what I've played of Titanfall. I think that for me as a player of games, the type of player that I am, what it seems, not having played it yet, that what Dark Souls 2 is doing is going to be something that's going to be of more interest to me personally, that it's going to pull me in more, as much as, I can admire Titanfall for the way in which its movement mechanics kind of reinvigorate the competitive, multiplayer shooter, but I doubt that I will spend a great deal of time with it myself, whereas Dark Souls 2 is a game that I imagine I will eventually end up sinking dozens and dozens of hours into.
I played the Titanfall. Well, I played much of the opening bit, the tutorial.
Oh, yeah.
It's a long tutorial.
Yeah, it is a long tutorial, but I haven't done anything beyond that. I immediately admired the way it felt. I actually couldn't believe that they had pulled off, hey, it's this easy to move through the world and do these really crazy-looking things without, it just feels like...
It's so intuitive. You don't even have to think about it.
It
exactly. Okay, I'm going to run across that billboard. I'm going to leap from there, do a double jump through this window, etc. It's just, you just think it and do it. You don't have to have that extra step of thinking about the complexity of the controls because they couldn't be simpler and they couldn't feel more natural.
But Dark Souls 2, it's going to be hard to surpass for me, I think, in a lot of ways. I did have a few minor disappointments. Especially I think the first hours of the game were a little bit more. They eased me into it more than I expected. There wasn't that one moment where, bam, this is Dark Souls, and this is showing you that this is Dark Souls, and the visuals. Obviously, that's been a topic of conversation anyway. And what do you guys make of this? So, just for people that don't know, so the pre-release footage of Dark Souls 2 featured superior visuals. IGN, for example, showed off a 15-minute clip apparently early on, and it was all clearly it was real gameplay. It was not anything. It was real gameplay, and it looked substantially different. I saw
it particularly. I haven't watched it, but particularly in terms of the lighting.
The lighting is the biggest thing.
Textures looked a lot better.
The textures looked better, and it's really interesting because I don't really like with a game like Dark Souls. I want to avoid pre-release coverage. I want to have that sense of discovery because that's sort of a Dark Souls thing. And even the developers and publishers of games have this odd tendency to kind of spoil their own things from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, well, and you see that in movies now too, where every trailer basically sums up the entire plot of the movie. I feel like so. Yeah, it is a problem in publicity and gaming PR.
But any trailer is naturally going to show off the best looking version of that game, whether that is a next gen or, in this case, most likely the PC version is what we've been seeing in those trailers.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see. I mean, and that's usually what you see anyway, is you see a PC version played with an Xbox 360 controller is pretty typical.
Okay, so I thought maybe this was an earlier build, a console build, but then when the whole game was put together, the world was put together, they just found that it couldn't handle the processing of the lighting, and so they had to sort of scale back the visuals to some degree. But you think that what we've seen in these in those videos is sort of representative of what the PC version is going to look like?
I think so.
Okay.
I hope so. Certainly.
Yeah, I mean,
and I feel like we're spoiled a little bit that, because we are working in a game office where people are playing all these games all the time. I see Xbox One and PS4 games constantly, and then I have to compare them to my PS3 360 experience, and it's margin. Like the difference, I think, is genuinely very small.
Sure.
But it is there. Like there is a definite difference.
And now you're starting to see it, especially at the same time when we have game that I cannot talk about that's on next gen in the office right now, and we're seeing it and it looks awesome, surprisingly awesome.
No, yeah, that game looks like that is sort of one of the first games I've seen, sort of AAA games where I'm like, oh my god, next gen. Yeah, it really is going to have an impact on how much I'm pulled into this experience, this world, because so many of these details just look so convincing and so stunning.
Yeah, Killzone was one of the first one of the few that did it for me early on. Maybe a little bit of Rise, but Rise is hard to because Rise is in a large world. It's easy to be more impressed with a big open world and it looking really good and having that fantastic draw distance, and suddenly you realize you can see all of these places. Oops, sorry, I'm throwing my hand around like nobody's business.
I would assume in the chat they were probably wondering what that game was. I'm just going to go ahead and say that it was Goat Simulator on next gen.
Yeah, it's amazing how good it looks. The hair, you remember when they first showed off The Last Guardian. The hair in The Last Guardian ain't got nothing on the hair in Goat Simulator.
And that tongue tongue physics just
it's insane. Like there was the heft that tongue has. So anyway, actually speaking of, what were we speaking about?
I don't know.
Dark
Souls
Guardian.
2? Oh, Last Guardian.
Yeah, Last Guardian. This isn't a planned podcast. I didn't come in with any script or anything like that. But I know that, and Justin, hopefully you can speak to this. I know that Sony has said something about Last Guardian this week, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to say about hair. Sony's talked a lot about hair.
We can talk about hair too. But
they have confirmed that The Last Guardian is still something that they're working on, but that it is something that they are waiting for the right moment. That is not something they're going to push. I mean, it's one of those games that is super hyped, and that they're not going to put something out there that they want to be disappointing. I mean, that is, of course, completely speaking around the fact that it has had a very troubled development cycle. The lead guy from it has not had a very happy experience. So part of it is that they probably had to go back to the drawing board, that it's not been doing that well, but Sony is still going to put the game out. They're not just going to make this a vaporware like some like many other titles have been, like Blizzard's what was that game? StarCraft Ghost,
yeah,
which never came to fruition, even though we saw that at E3 many years ago.
Sure.
But yeah, it's something they're still working on. We did a feature not too long ago called Missing in Action, where we explored some games that people had talked about, that people were excited about, and that we knew were, at least in some sense, being worked on, that never came out. Although a lot of people at that time called out Shenmue 3. Shenmue 3 was never officially confirmed, of course, because Shenmue 2 did so terribly.
It ends on a huge cliffhanger, right?
The same with Half-Life Episode 2. Like,
Yeah.
two games that ended on big cliffhangers, but very different, ending in very different circumstances,
Yes.
where Sega had incredible problems, went way over budget with Shenmue 2, whereas Half-Life 2 Episode 2, Valve is making tons and tons of money.
Oh, yeah.
But they've never talked about their sequel.
It's really interesting too. I mean, what do you suppose, Justin? You know everything about everything there is to know about things. But there was a point where we thought Episode 3 was coming out, and it's come out since then that another episode, perhaps not to be known as Episode 4, but there was indeed another episode being worked on, Return to Ravenholm. And that was who was working on Return to Ravenholm? That was Arcane, right? I think they were working on it pre-Dishonored, and then eventually that was canceled before it was ever officially announced. But what do you suppose is happening? If you had to make an educated or uneducated guess, where do you suppose Half-Life stands at Valve at this stage?
They're also one of those companies who have, and especially now because there's so much hype, they have to put out an amazing product. Like, it can't even just be good at this point. They waited too long. And I think part of the reason that it was delayed was that was when Steam was taking off, when that was becoming a really big thing. And then suddenly, like, we're making money hand over fist. Let's put some more resources into this. People are going to still want to play Half-Life whenever we put it out. Like, we can just do that whenever. Making money hand over fist with Steam. And then that kind of got pushed to the back burner. And now it's been such a long time that if it's not an absolutely amazing experience, they're going to get burned. Like, so many people are so frothing at the mouth to play this.
Do you think that it's fair to say, though, that it's been in some stage of development for quite some time?
Oh, that is without a doubt. So I always think it's funny when people are like, "Oh, Half-Life 3 hasn't been confirmed." Like, no, of course, yes, of course, Valve is working on Half-Life 3. They want money. It's probably going to be Half-Life 3 at this point, because why would you have Episode 3 at this point? That just seems like it would be kind of a weird, bad choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly as good as the source engine looks, and we see it with Titanfall. The Titanfall is certainly a fine-looking game.
Fine-looking, yeah.
And it's not, an amazing-looking game, but it's a fine-looking game, and it runs on the source engine. The source engine has held up very well, but I don't think Valve's at the stage where they can get away with using the original source engine.
No.
So we have to assume that Source 2 is in development as well as Half-Life 3.
And what better showcase title for Source 2 than Half-Life 3? And
saying, my money is on Half-Life 3 VR. That's where my money is.
VR?
Yeah.
I mean, Oculus is going to have a really big position. GDC is coming up next week. That is going to be taking up all of our time. Planning for that has taken up a ridiculous amount of my time. And I think virtual reality as a whole is going to play a big part of that. We're going to be talking with Oculus. They are in deep connection with Valve. The stuff that they're, like, a lot of Valve guys have left. Valve was working on their own VR headset. A lot of those guys left to go over to Oculus. Talking with the Oculus guys, they work very closely with Valve. And I think it's a very strong possibility, and I'm purely speculating that we'll hear about Source 2 and a Half-Life 3 VR around the same time.
I'm curious about that, though, because I come from this position. Maybe it's because I'm old, and maybe it's because I'm disillusioned, or maybe it's because I'm old and disillusioned. I wonder, though, because I haven't necessarily been. I mean, it's games first and foremost for me, and I don't see the Oculus Rift as a major and important consumer device. I see it as a device for people like maybe you and me and people that are really into games, but not something that's a must-have for the average person that plays games. And I don't see Steam machines as something that's ultimately going to be that important or take off in a big way. I think that they will be used, and I think the OS means something. But I don't think the concept of a Steam machine in and of itself right now as a piece of hardware is very compelling.
Well, Valve is very confused with what they're pushing Steam to. Like, the people they're going after first are Steam users, people that already have a PC, and they're like, well, the biggest complaint that we hear is that I want to play from Steam users is that I want to play these games in my living room, and so we're trying to give you that option. Right. Although, as a hardcore gamer, that's not a problem I've ever heard. Like, the solution to that is I plug my computer into my TV because I can do that, and I know how computers work.
And with so many games now supporting, a controller, and with the Steam controller itself coming out, and apparently that haptic feedback, those analog stick replacement haptic feedback dishes, or I think of them as like, I don't know, like the big satellite dishes in the ground, like the Arecibo, kind of stuff. That's how I think about that stuff, is like little teeny, craters underneath my thumbs. But apparently you're going to be able to play very PC-specific genres like RTSs and whatnot using that. I don't know how well it's
That
going
remains
to
to
work,
be seen.
but I'm curious. Is the existence of a Steam machine going to be really important? So that really just brings me around to the idea of Valve's priorities right now. And do you think that ultimately, like, these things are innovations, or do you think it's just Valve sticking its foot out to see what it can do, because it has so many resources that it has an opportunity to just sort of mess around and see what sticks?
I mean, Valve is almost at a Google-like point where they can push stuff out there, and whether it works or not, like, that's not as important as them experimenting and trying things that could potentially get absolutely huge. Google has stuff all the time that's like, oh, it's this new app or something that I'm using, and we don't support that anymore, and we're just going to take that away from you.
Right.
And Valve is definitely the point where they can do that, and especially with something like Steam machines, where basically the impetus is on other companies. Like, for them, it seems like they saw this as a good idea, and they're telling, hey guys, make a machine. We'll make the OS for it, and it'll play our games. You guys make it. You guys put all the money into it, and it'll benefit everybody. But Valve is very, very smart with money, and just as a very smart company. And the fact that they're putting so much into VR, and also having tried Oculus through several iterations, I'm actually starting to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. I was a complete naysayer of virtual reality as a whole when it was first coming out, because having gone through a couple generations of this where it was always kind of terrible and really expensive and really bulky. Oculus is starting to change my mind, and they keep bringing on more and more really smart people. Recently, ID's John Carmack joining, and they really seem to know what they're doing and going after a consumer product. Their goal is to make something that is an amazing product for less than $300. And if they can actually deliver that, and with the prototypes that I've tried out, it's a really amazing experience. It is completely immersive in ways that I would not have thought that something this cheap could be.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it seems like there are interesting gameplay innovations that are possible through something like Oculus. Peter, I was talking at one point about a space combat simulator that he played on Oculus. I forget which one it was.
It makes you feel like you're in Battlestar Galactica.
Well, but also the fact that, when you're playing, like in the old days when I would play Wing Commander or, X-Wing on my PC, you're limited to looking straight ahead through the cockpit. I mean, you might be able to use the pad to look around, but if you're steering your ship to target an enemy, you have to literally move the ship to target the enemy. But in this game that Peter played, the ship might be flying one direction, but he could look up through the cockpit and target an enemy, visually, and so you can fly in one direction, but have that situational awareness and even maybe fire in other directions, which is something you without that sort of immersive ability to actually look around, you can't do. Right. So if the Oculus Rift, because I've had terrible experiences with virtual reality in the past, but if this is actually something that can really enhance gameplay and be that immersive, like you said, Battlestar Galactica kind of experience, like I'm actually in this environment completely and really living it. It could be really, really something.
I'm curious though, and this might just be me. I always think of playing a game as a relatively sedentary experience, and of course, then we had the Wii and we have Kinect and things like that sort of take it away from that realm. But I don't know that, I don't think that the Wii has ultimately had a huge lasting impact. I don't, certainly. Well,
I would disagree with that 100%.
Well, I should rephrase that, because what I mean is I don't think that the Wii ultimately is spawning more machines that people that, I don't know. We think of the Wii as sort of like the casual machine, right? This is the Wii tennis machine, but it catered to an audience that I think more or less is happy having a Wii. And it's also an audience that I think finds more value in getting up and moving around because they're playing games that make that fun. Is that maybe more of a...
Well, I think that the Wii changed the way that these companies approach the games. Like, I don't
Right.
think we would have had Kinect without Wii first.
I totally agree. It was a bad way of me phrasing it in terms of the lasting impact. But then I wonder, Kinect certainly is not... It doesn't seem like an essential piece of hardware. It seems like it went from, here's a curiosity and some developers, used it in some interesting ways. And now it really is just a curiosity and doesn't seem like an important...
Well, that's only because Kinect Sports All-Stars isn't out yet. So that game is going to change everything.
And so I wonder in the same way, I look at something like the Oculus Rift and I wonder how many people want something that requires more of your input, and even though moving your head around by itself isn't really a big deal, right? But how many people want that much of their body importance to the experience?
I agree, and it's an extra step that you just may not want to deal with. I mean, there was this, to me, really fantastic experience last year, a sort of add-on, a supplement to Kentucky Route Zero called The Entertainment, which is basically a play. It is basically a theatrical performance that you watch.
Right.
And you can just do this on your PC, on the monitor or with the Oculus Rift. And while I imagine that, having the Oculus Rift, and being able to look around the theater this way as opposed to using just the mouse to do it would be kind of immersive, I just don't... I think that I still was fully emotionally engaged just playing it on my PC, and I'm like, generally speaking, am I really going to want to put this thing on my head and do all this stuff?
And that's
If the
kind
games
of
are
what
awesome,
I'm
then
wondering.
yes.
Maybe.
Maybe if the games really are awesome, but the thing is, really for this, it really does just come down to, the sort of the presentation aspect and not really so much. It's sort of like the 3D on the 3DS. Like it really isn't, involved in gameplay usually. And like you're talking about moving your head,
I would say.
right? And like you're talking about moving your head around and stuff. And yeah, that does bring something to it.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I wonder if I'm wondering if the removal of like the TV in front of you is somewhat offset by the fact that you now have a thing strapped to your head.
Right. It is that trade-off.
I'm curious, and this isn't... I find value in all of this stuff. So, I'm not trying to say, hey, it's the end of the Oculus Rift. I'm just wondering if it really is...
It's a niche within a niche.
consumer
It's
product.
funny, like right now, when I was at PAX and I saw all these people testing the Oculus Rift or some similar device, it was this sort of nightmarish sci-fi dystopian vision of all these people just like their bodies slack and like with these things on their heads, and it was sort of unsettling in a way, but it may be that a sort of thing where not too far down the road it seems perfectly just normal, we've accepted it and embraced it, or it may always seem kind of
on the fringe sort of thing.
It can never get that. It can never get to the extent that just regular gaming is, because the reason that my mom is into gaming is because it's a quick thing that you can just do on the side, like iPhone gaming. The reason everybody plays games on their iPhone is because you can just do it anytime, and it's quick and it's easy, and you can put it up and put it down. So this is a niche within a niche. Like, this is only hardcore gamers who are going to be into that. But there are games that appeal to those kind of people. Like MOBAs are what I would have thought, like, this is never going to catch on. This is such a hardcore focused crowd. But now you have like Riot Games and these huge MLG tournaments that make millions and millions of dollars,
Right.
Tournaments that rival the Super Bowl in terms of size of people watching them.
Certainly wouldn't have seen that coming, probably.
And to that extent, like, having that niche within a niche isn't necessarily a failure. And it's not going to be to the point of mobile gaming.
It won't be, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's bringing it back then to Valve. That's what I wonder, if Valve puts so many eggs into these baskets that, to me, feel niche, if it really is like putting a lot of effort into virtual reality and into this controller and into Steam machines and into things like that, are we really getting something more worthwhile ultimately, and something that really is tailored towards the people that love Valve that we would have had if, again, I think they have the resources to try these things out and test them.
Exactly.
But ultimately, when do they get to the point where they might run the risk of losing the goodwill that they've earned based on things like Half-Life? I'm curious. I don't think that they necessarily are.
I feel like they're a long way from there. I mean, I like Justin's Google analogy. I mean, a lot of stuff that Google has started and pushed out has just fallen by the wayside, isn't supported anymore. But
I miss Google Reader so much.
But by and large, people still like Google, right? I mean, as a company, in generally speaking.
But I
don't
think
know.
they've lost a lot of that.
Well, they're also a little more evil. They
they're
kind of
definitely more evil than they used to be.
They are. They definitely are.
And I mean, I wonder about Amazon too. Like, has Amazon? Do we've gotten to the point where we feel Amazon's overstepped their?
Oh, no, Amazon.
I've hated Amazon forever.
Forever. Okay.
I hate the way that. Yeah, I don't want to get in.
I love Amazon.
Anti-Amazon rant. I use Amazon occasionally, but
they're totally evil. I mean, I realize they're evil.
They're awful.
Right.
But that's fine.
Sure.
Well, I think about the big deal made about the drones delivering things to your house, for example, and
so
suddenly
cool.
it seems again that maybe it is the next big thing, or maybe it really does just come across as Amazon putting a lot of resources into something that benefits relatively few people and make it look like they're out of touch regarding what people really do want. So I don't know.
See, it's serving the greater good because ultimately what all of this is working towards is giving us the holodeck. And once we have a holodeck, we're all going to look back on this and go, do you remember when we had PlayStation Move and those 3D headsets? Well, now I have the holodeck, Dad. Why would I want to play with those stupid things?
Yeah.
Oh, holodeck.
We'll see. As long as what we do is better than most of the holodeck episodes on the next generation, I'll be happy. Although there are some exceptions. So what else is going on? What else happened this week, Justin? You did news. Caro, we actually talked about this earlier. The Last of Us movie we know is coming.
Yeah. Yeah, so, right, there's a Last of Us movie coming.
People mentioned that you might be a good fit for Ellie. Kevin?
Yes, I have been anxious to show what I can do.
I'm really... The idea of a Last of Us movie does not excite me because I think that the game...
is a movie.
That the storytelling in the game is already so excellent, and particularly, I think, Left Behind does such fascinating things in fusing gameplay with storytelling. The ways in which the mechanics of combat are actually kind of put on their head and are used in a way to help foster this feeling of a relationship with this other character. I think, that's... to me, Naughty Dog doing some really interesting things with storytelling and gameplay.
So many parts of the game would not be as powerful. They wouldn't be as evocative or effective if they weren't a game, if I wasn't controlling them.
And you sometimes hear people say things like, well, the interactivity proves that games are inherently, a better storytelling medium than film, which I completely disagree with. I mean, I am a big fan of cinema, and I think that
they're very different.
Yeah, I think they're very different, but I think that The Last of Us... it worked extremely well as a game, right? And I don't need to see that story or be in that world through film. It worked so well as a game and by design. I mean, Druckmann and Bruce Straley and the whole team at Naughty Dog who worked on that game really, I think, they knew what they were doing. They were really smart about the ways in which they designed gameplay systems to support the mood that they were going for with the narrative as well, so that these things came together in a way that was really effective.
And it is one of those things too, where we talk about this a lot. The best stories in games are the ones that can only be told in games, or use their existence as a game to their advantage somehow.
Right. That. I mean, you can't. The story of The Last of Us can absolutely be told in a film.
Sure.
But I just think that it's already been told so effectively. I mean, maybe if the Last of Us film takes place in the same universe, but it isn't about them and kind of just sheds light on the world or on other characters, that might totally have value. That might be interesting.
I mean, we're still at the stage, though, where we're waiting for that one film based on a game that's actually considered to be quite good and widely acclaimed. I mean,
whatever, man. The first Mortal Kombat movie was awesome.
I mean, is Tomb Raider is Tomb Raider considered more or less the best of the crop, or what do you think is largely considered to be?
There must be an anime that's really good based on a game. There must be.
And outside of Street Fighter, right?
Well, I mean, there are Persona animes and things like that. So there's like an anime based on Persona and some stuff like that. But I've never watched those, so they could be great for all I know.
So, there's the new Need for Speed film, which I have not seen, and I refuse to see. I will not forgive it for the ultimate cinematic sin of wasting the talents of Michael Keaton. I mean, you get Michael Keaton in your movie, you use him because he is awesome, and apparently this movie completely squanders Michael Keaton.
It just seems like the kind of stunt casting that you do just to say that he's in it. Kind of like the Dungeon Siege movie was like, hey, Burt Reynolds is on our movie.
And it's because he walks through the background.
Yeah, exactly, and that's about the best you can hope for. So we'll see. Aaron Paul, people love Aaron Paul on Breaking Bad, right?
Oh yeah, I mean Aaron Paul. He's a fine young actor. He's very intense. He's got that whole intensity thing down.
You're gonna say you've never seen Breaking Bad?
I know I've never seen Breaking Bad.
Wow.
I feel bad. TV is a weird thing for me because I don't watch a lot of it, and I tend to catch up later, or I tend to catch up because I have a friend who's watching it and therefore wants me to see it so that we can talk about it. And so for example, I'm catching up on House of Cards now so that I can talk about House of Cards, and I have a lot of feelings about House of Cards now as it's going along. I watched The Bridge, the original Swedish TV show The Bridge, because of that very reason. And of course I watched Attack on Titan, which is amazing, and people should all watch Attack on Titan if you have the stomach to handle intensity from in every second of. So
I just want to go back to The Last of Us really quickly, go on a bit of a tangent here, but just briefly say this, like, when I wrote up, so The Last of Us Left Behind was our game of the month, and a lot of people, had very strong feelings about this, which I totally respect and understand. But some people in the comments talked about, suggested that I was bringing politics into games, or that I had an agenda, and this is to me like a really important idea that I feel like video games. Well, this is not an idea. I think this is simply true. Video games are inherently political, just like films are inherently political, right? I mean, a game like Call of Duty, a lot of people might not be playing it and thinking, oh, this game exhibits a certain worldview or et cetera, but it absolutely does.
It's a great example of American jingoism.
So,
right there.
What about Flappy Bird?
So I'm not. So So games have meanings. Games have socio-political meanings, and sometimes those meanings are relevant and worth talking about in the context of games.
Sure. Well, and that's very true, and I think this is tough though because we want to avoid spoilers for Left Behind for those who haven't played it. But there, it is more of an interesting conversation. This comes up all the time.
I can say that part of the reason that I think that game deserves to be celebrated is because it does something that's sadly exceptionally rare in games, and that it portrays a relationship between women who matter as individuals, as women, because of what they mean to each other and because they're fully realized people, and not just in relation to men, or the way that I think women so often are presented as having value in games.
Well, now that you've taken that 1 minute and 30 seconds, now you've turned this into another political podcast.
Well,
Carolyn.
I mean, it's
and it's all we talk about and write about on GameSpot.
Well, you used the word agenda at the very beginning of this podcast, so
it's the game agenda.
The game agenda. So there you go.
That's really interesting, though, that stuff like that comes up. And actually, there's a broader thing for me, too, which is the idea of certain things being political at all sometimes boggles my mind, like the idea of something like gay rights being political, or just the idea of being nice to other people as being inherently political, or wanting to do things for other people as somehow political. Like, sometimes those things sort of boggle my mind, like, oh my gosh, you celebrated that there was a great woman character in this game. Stop being so political. And sometimes I wonder why such a thing is political at all. Shouldn't we just celebrate the fact that when portrayal of complex women in games is still relatively rare, and of course in film and on TV as well, it's
absolutely
still relatively rare. Or at least maybe more common than it used to be, certainly, but
but not equitable by any stretch of the imagination
and
yet.
So I think when we celebrate something like that, it's or criticize based on tropes and things like that, it's always really strange to me that people think of that as political. And some people will say, like, hey, I just play games because I want to escape. I don't want any of those things. But as you mentioned, there are things that are inherently...
Yeah, the games you're playing are political. They may not... The statements that they're making may not challenge your worldview in any way. They may just kind of mesh comfortably with how you see or think about the world, and that's fine.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that they don't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they aren't political.
Reinforcing the status quo is still political. It still makes
it's about
a
as political as it gets.
Yeah.
I think.
But I think for some people, the statements that they make, like some people do, they do want to get into these titles, these games, to escape and not think about it. No, like all movies, like all books, there's always a statement that can be made, and for some people, like I think the way that they want to think about it is maybe that's more part of their worldview, and then reading criticism, they're not necessarily looking for criticism. They're sometimes looking for a buying choice, or they just kind of want to know, like, is this something that I would enjoy? I want to take whatever meaning I'm going to get away from it, which is not going to be anything like your guys's, because I'm not that kind of person. I just want to go and shoot people in the face. That's the meaning I want to take away from this game. Why are you trying to tell me that it's about feelings and emotions?
And there's nothing wrong with playing the things that you are. What weirds me out about sometimes something like this is that there are people that think that the existence of this type of game somehow is taking away from their enjoyment. It's almost like, you've got the status quo and you have a voice that's getting a little bit louder and larger. You see this in the way people talk about games that have different types of gameplay, like Gone Home or like Proteus or even Journey or things like that. You see people think of it as some kind of affront.
The funniest thing that happened to me in the wake of the Gone Home review was that I got a private message from somebody saying, don't you think that Gone Home is a threat to games, because we're going to get all these games that are just
walking around.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like a small indie game. This is in no way a threat to the Titanfalls, and Calls of Duty and so on of the world, right?
Suddenly people are worried that these games are going to take away.
Yeah.
Like suddenly there, instead of there being 200 shooters for me to choose from, there might only be 198. Whatever will I do? And that's what's interesting to me about it, is this idea that because there are things that don't fit with what they want from games, that but that's kind of weird to me. Like, because if you want to go to the movies and watch Transformers, there will always be a movie like that for you. But I rarely hear people talk about, I can't believe that they're making art film. That takes away from the fact that I'm going to go see Mission Impossible 7.
Right.
Nobody talks about that, or nobody says, I can't believe that they're making real literature when all I want to do is read Danielle Steele.
Mission Impossible 6 did have a pretty deep meaning.
That's true. Hence the 6. It has 6 layers of meaning.
There was a lot of Scientology stuff in it.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. Like in other words, I just celebrate lots of different games, and I like lots of different things, and I like shooting people in the face, and I like games that are pure fun, like Mario and Vanquish and things like that.
My favorite game to play in my spare time right now is Resogun, which that game is like pure mechanics, right? That's what makes that game so exciting. Is is its mechanics. It doesn't have really any political meaning that I can take away from it at all. It's just fun. Strider is also but I mean, when games do have overt political meanings, I think it's relevant for us to comment on them as part of the larger discussion about what the game is doing.
With every game, we're not going to start talking about
and I think you can do both, right? You can evaluate a game kind of as a entertainment product, like, okay, what do you get for your $15 or $20 or $60? How does it play? Is it fun? Are the mechanics good, etc.? As well as talking about any other issues there. And, hopefully a reader who's only interested in one facet of that can come to a review and read it and take what is relevant to them out of it and kind of ignore the other stuff. I guess I would hope so.
Totally.
And having that extra conversation is nice, because then it's not like we're siloed. They can get into the comments and talk with us.
Exactly. And I feel like it elevates games. I feel like if we pretend that games are only products, then they're going to remain at a certain level of sort of low cultural importance, kind of like where maybe comic books stayed for a long time in terms of like the larger perspective of them. But if we actually start talking about the larger meanings of games, then I feel like that respects what games are, right? It says games can have deeper value and deeper meaning, and we are honoring games by engaging in these larger issues around games.
Well, there's always this seemingly, like, I don't want to use the word hypocrisy because I don't think that's right, but our culture can be very defensive about games and very protective. And so when we see, for example, politicians laying on games as like, and suddenly characterizing games as, hey, games are only just, shooting simulators, and this is why people go crazy, and this is responsible for violence. Obviously we come to gaming's defense and we say, no, but look at all of these other games and all of the things that you can do in games and how shooting is not the center of lots of games. But then the moment it really, we actually start looking at games as something more than just a shooting simulator, or like critics start doing that, or people in general start talking about games in a larger sense about their artistic merit, they suddenly become very defensive about, no, it's just all about having fun and shooting people in the face. And I've always felt that if you want to be able to call games art, that you then need to be able to handle when games are criticized and
you can't have it.
art.
You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
You can't fall back on they don't mean anything. They're just entertainment argument when it suits you, and then say, no, they're art. When, say, the late Roger Ebert dismissed them as not art.
But like Ebert, I think all of us, find value in games of all sorts.
Exactly. That's
He loved, a great action film, and he loved a great raunchy comedy.
That was one of the things that I admired most about Ebert, is that he approached games. Films. Yeah. he approached films kind of always asking, like, what is this film trying to do? And then how well does it do that? So a film like Spider-Man 2, which is, I think, a great superhero film, and he loved it as well, could get a 4-star rating right alongside a film like The Godfather Part 2, which, is considered like a cinematic masterpiece for the ages.
Sure.
But I mean, they have such different aims, and you have to bring that to your viewing of the film. Sure. But at the same time, when a film did something that he thought was truly morally reprehensible, like I remember him really objecting to Kick-Ass, he would call it out for that, So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of respect for his approach to criticism in general.
Yeah, and we all do that. I mean, he always talked about the difference between, say, 3.5 stars and 4 stars is the feeling of uplift. Like if a film had the ability to give him that sense of uplift, that whatever that emotional feeling,
spiritual almost feeling of like something transcendent about it.
But that can come from all sorts of ways. Sometimes that comes, again, like I talk about Vanquish, quite often, but that's one of those games that provides that kind of uplift for me. But it's a very different kind of uplift from the kind of thing I get from, say, Dark Souls, which is very different from the kind of thing that I get from Journey. Which is one of the one of the greatest uplift games of all time. Is the sort of the emotional connection that I have with Journey, and for you, Gone Home, provides that sense of uplift, and that's more of a it's a narrative uplift that comes from not only the story that game tells, but the way the game allows you to discover that.
Exactly.
And,
so,
I don't know, there's just so many things games can do, and it always boggles me when people talk about, everything's just a Call of Duty clone, or everything's just this or that. There is so much there's so much more mechanical diversity and emotional diversity in games than ever before, and it's only going to grow, and that doesn't mean that, we're going to have fewer games that let you escape. It just means that we have a lot more out there for the rest of us that
are doing different things.
Than just that. I like that, and I like other things than that too, if that makes any sense.
Totally,
Call of Duty's allowed to be Call of Duty, and Gone Home's allowed to be Gone Home, and I think that it's great that we live in a place and a time where we get to have both, and we don't have to choose, and we can have them both, or we can have neither. Or we can just choose one over the other.
I would probably play 3s more if it didn't feel like such a blatant ripoff of Call of Duty, though.
True.
Well, I have a problem with the game I'm playing, 2s, because it seems like a blatant ripoff of Medal of Honor. And, I did come across... See, I have my stupid Windows phone So I
So
did-
everything's just a blatant ripoff of what the rest of us are playing.
No. I have a Windows phone which has a lot of wonderful games on it, and I do have
Did you
Android
Bing them?
devices, so it's not as though I.
When you search for new games, do you Bing them? Do you Bing for games?
No, you use the App Store in whatever they call the App Store, the Marketplace, I guess, the Marketplace on the phone. But so on Facebook, I'm playing a Threes clone. Only it uses multiples of 2 instead of multiples of 3, but otherwise,
Oh, I
it's
I thought you were totally
functionally the
joking.
same. No.
No, I saw him playing this the other day.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
and it's quite good, and I wish I had Threes but I do play Wordament, and I'm gonna give a shout out to the game Wordament just for a second
Because
we
you don't do it enough on Twitter.
I don't do it enough. So the thing on Twitter is different though. On Twitter, I'm just proud sometimes of my high scores, and actually, I tend to score very highly in that game. But I'm at that wall. The highest I've ever been is 12th place out of usually there will be like 1,500, 1,600 at a time, and the way the game works is it's online, but it's not like you're not officially playing. You're playing at the same time as other people. So everybody is solving the same puzzle at the same time, and it's all timed in the same way. And then there's a leaderboard that comes afterwards that tells you how well you did. So all it is like making words by dragging your finger across letters and making words that way. But it's really involving, and part of it is the competitive nature of it. And the highest I've gotten is 99% and 12th place. I so desperately want to crack the top 10. And there's an achievement for cracking the top 10 times.
Oh my god.
And I've only gotten there once. There's an achievement for being first place. I've never been first place. I am so desperate to become better. And I look at some of these scores, and even like 10th place, everybody's like more or less like this really even curve of scores. But then at the very top, like the top 3 will have like sometimes like several dozen points between them, to the point where I wonder, how does this person in first place do that? I don't even think it's physically possible to drag your finger that fast. How do you do that?
He's
The nice-
cheating.
So
The nice thing about Threes is that I'm directly competing against my other friends. Like, I can see what their scores are. I guess you don't really get that problem on Windows Phone, though.
No, shut up.
I'm just going to keep making that joke until...
Shut up. Well, Wordament is now it's multi-platform. It used to be Windows Phone exclusive, but it's now multi-platform on
Because
iPhone
they wanted to make money.
and on Android. But you can also get Xbox achievements even on the iPhone and Android versions.
Oh, I was curious. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about Xbox One achievements,
Yeah.
and related to that, the guy made finally got 1 million Xbox achievements.
Oh
gamer
right.
score.
Yeah,
That's
I saw
insane
that.
to me. 1 million. That's like playing
He spent 8 years.
1,000 games, getting the full 1,000 points out of 1,000 games.
And of course, he was chasing after it, so he would play like multiple regions of the same really simple games, so he
Yeah.
could get the achievements. But still, that's a ridiculous number of achievement points.
I want to know his total playtime.
I don't know.
I would like to know.
So, but I was wondering where. So the way that I consume most media now is through Netflix. I only have Netflix and Hulu. I don't have cable. And generally when I do that, I just do it straight through my TV. But literally every game console I have has YouTube and Hulu Plus, from 3DS, Vita, every Microsoft, Wii U, PlayStation platform. How do you guys watch like the shows and movies and TV that you watch?
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to use my Xbox 360 Netflix. Now at home I have just a PS4 hooked up, so I've been using like the Netflix on there. And when I'm watching this TV show called The Americans, but I don't get FX, which is the network that it's on. So the day after the episode airs, I will buy it in the Sony store and watch it on my PlayStation 4. But
Sorry, by the way, that I keep waving my hand in front of the camera. I get worked up, and I'm sort of a hands talker from time to time. Oh, but for me, it's funny because, first of all, I like having lots of things on at one time sometimes. I'm a big comfort TV watcher, so I'm somebody that tends to not watch exactly as much as I like having something on. And a lot of that comes down to things I've already seen a bunch of times already. So walking into my apartment typically means going Xbox on. So I talk to my Xbox when I walk into the apartment, and because I now have my cable going through my Xbox and my my Hulu and my Netflix all hooked up. So typically I turn on my TV and my Xbox when I come home just by saying Xbox on, and I say Xbox go to Netflix or Xbox go to Hulu Plus, and then I just start whatever, and then I sit down at my PC, and then I start browsing and then playing whatever game, or, like, so I have one TV that my PC is hooked up to, and also, like, right now my PS3, because usually I have, like, the Xbox going on that TV, meaning the TV, really, I'm watching TV at the same time that I'm playing a game on the other TV, either with another console or with, on the PC.
Do you ever browse the internet on your console?
No.
Like, have you ever said Xbox Bing Batman?
No. No, I don't do that. The only thing I really use the Kinect for is for the voice stuff now, and only that's because sometimes if I don't have, like, it's stupid, but it's nice to come in and say Xbox on. Sure. I don't have to go get the remote and press the button or whatever. And maybe that's totally lazy, but I got to admit, sometimes I get a kick out of talking to it. Like, even if I say Xbox go to TV and it goes there, and then it knows that I was watching whatever network, and I can say Xbox watch KCBS or whatever, and it goes there. And that's kind of neat. It
absolutely is. It's that whole vision of the future sort of thing that we're living in now.
Yeah.
When it works.
When it works.
And sometimes there are those moments, especially because I'll have something else on. If I'm playing a game on the other TV and it's picking up a lot of noise in the room or whatever, then I'll say Xbox volume up or whatever, or I'll say something that'll mishear me, and suddenly I'm in some stupid thing that I don't know how I got there. Like, how did I get into SkyDrive? Like, what am I doing here?
It's not called SkyDrive anymore, Kevin.
It's called OneDrive. I noticed earlier today. I didn't know that until today when I uploaded a video from my phone to OneDrive, which is still called on my phone SkyDrive. So this is a really boring conversation that I've led us into. But no, I mean, with my consoles and stuff, like, and my TV has that stuff built in too. Mm-hmm. Like, I can watch Netflix and Hulu on my TV, just because of its built-in.
I mean, these guys are pushing these consoles to be multimedia devices. They're not just something that you watch games on. They're how you access movies and TV. And I was wondering just how effective you think that is. Because for me, I bypass it. I just ignore it completely, and I just use Netflix on my TV because that's literally one button press away.
You obviously don't watch football, Justin.
I watch local football. It's going to be streamed local. I don't watch other teams. I only watch the Giants.
I was just saying that because of the commercials. You know how they used to try to pitch all that? Like, you watch TV, and then you play your games, you watch football, you call your friend and tell them, oh my God, that movie's so good. I wonder how many
people use the Snap. How many people, like, I mean, I like multitasking, obviously. I'm doing multiple things at once, but I'm doing them on different platforms.
Yeah, that would be really useful if I didn't
Snap, I wonder.
If you didn't have a phone or an iPad or some other any other device that you just have in your lap anyway, it would be more useful. But I don't know anyone who doesn't use something else when they want to, like, oh, I'm going to look this up on Wikipedia, and I'm like, hey, Xbox Snap, Wikipedia there, so I can start looking.
I just go to my computer. I use my Windows Phone, which apparently this podcast brought to you by Microsoft Windows Phone. Actually, I do rather like the phone. But anyway, we should talk about other stuff. So before we leave for the day, I saw, Justin, that at the Plants vs. Zombies studio that there were cuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's sad. It's nothing unusual, of course. It's very typical, actually, once a project comes to an end for people that worked on that project to be let go or to be moved into other projects and so on.
I mean, it's sad when you see it, especially at the larger a developer is, the more likely that is to happen because just of the way that they structure things. At smaller developers, you don't tend to see it because they tend to be working really hard to get those people working on another project or something so that they're not going to lose their job. Like Double Fine was very public about when Double Fine, the guys that made Broken Age, that did Psychonauts and lots of Brutal Legend, lots of other games. When they did Broken Age, which was the game that they kickstarted, about halfway through it, they were like, and we're working on another game, and we're going to kickstart it. The reason that we're doing that is because all of the people that were working on the pre-stuff, on the art and the design and just laying out this world, they're not going to actually program it, and we want to keep having them work. So we have to start another project, and that's why we're working on another game simultaneously. Like, you think of it as simultaneously, but they're just completely different teams within that. But then when you get to a really big developer like PopCap, you have to bulk up right before you ship the game because that's when you're going to fix the bugs and just make the game work and make it as good as it can be before they ship it out the door. And not all of those guys are going to be people that you keep around, especially if it's not an MMO or something that requires those guys to stick around and keep that game functioning.
Well, that comes up a lot when people complain about DLC, when they say, well, wouldn't it have been better if you would have just been working on making this this bit of the game worked better that needed patched or whatever. But you have to understand the people that have now since moved on to DLC haven't really been actively involved in working on the main game because they're done now for the most part. Artists and level designers and people like that.
Sometimes
more
they're
or
different
less,
teams entirely.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a completely different studio that's doing the DLC.
So, but even outside of that, like I know that when they announced, because The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt was announced. I should say The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I put an extra "the" in there, but in any case, we know it was delayed, and I say delayed with quotation marks because there was no official release date at that point, but they did announce that it was going to.
We thought it was going to be fall of this year, right?
But it now went to 2015, early 2015, and people ask me, how is this going to affect, for example, does that mean that Cyberpunk 2077 is then going to be delayed as well? And of course, it could be delayed. But I imagine at this stage, The Witcher 3 is at this stage probably more or less feature complete. And a lot of the people that worked on those aspects of Witcher 3 are probably not only working on Cyberpunk, but it was probably more or less different people that were working on Cyberpunk to begin with, because those games are being co-developed. And it seems as though CD Projekt Red is in a fantastic place to be able to be building 2 huge RPGs, right?
Poland is a fantastic place to be building 2 huge RPGs. Yes.
Yeah.
Like we get a skewed view of it. I think consumers have a very different view of the way games are made than they used to be, because you have these betas that go out, which are not in any way the beta that they used to be, where the beta was used to fix stuff. And now a beta is basically a demo. They're like saying, here's a demo, and it's a little bit buggy because we're still fixing some things, but it's not actually a beta. It's just an early demo. But by that point, they're not going to be adding anything else new to the game.
The Titanfall beta, right? How significant could
Like by then, they were
changes-
almost ready
yeah.
to start just printing the game to disc, because that also takes a long time. Print the game to discs, put out, like, get all the packaging, ship that out to stores. Like, all of this takes weeks before the game launches. Like, they're already done doing everything they're going to do. Like, you can recommend, like, hey, you guys needed to... Like, that was mostly for server-side stuff and to make sure it didn't crash everything completely, which it kind of did a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, Watch Dogs, for example, has been feature complete for quite some time. And it's not being released until April. They announced a release date, right? Or was it May? April, May?
I want to say April. They gave a release window.
Right. They gave a window, so it's soon.
No, it was a specific date, right? We even had
For some reason I thought it
Oh
was a
no,
date,
yes,
but
no,
maybe
we
it
did.
was-
We were given a date.
Sean got the date when he was up there checking out Watch Dogs recently.
Maybe it was May 27th.
Yeah, could
That
be.
May
I know-
27, yeah.
May
May
27th?
27th.
Okay, so I knew it was coming soon, but of course that game's been feature complete. It was rated by the ESRB a couple months ago. So we
It was
know-
re-rated. They added they upped it a little bit with the matureness.
Did they?
Yes.
Did it go from T to M in that case, or did it?
So on the Australian side, they completely re-rated it, but there was not a mention made of the American ESRB rating was taken down from the website, and they did not comment on that yet, and it has not gone up with a new rating.
Right. Now I have this reminds me of something else, because South Park: The Stick of Truth, I recall, had certain things taken out of it for Australia and for Germany, and in the case of Germany, it was swastikas being taken out, and then I if I recall correctly, then the game still didn't come out because there were found some lingering swastikas or something, and so they had to go back to the drawing board. So
There was
that
a
they
lot
could
of
release it
Hitler
in
voice
Germany.
in that game.
There's a lot of Hitler. There is Hitler stuff in that game. There is, yes, Third Reich is represented well in that game, and some other things. I was curious too, because there were 2 things in it that even pushed my limits of good taste. And not that I think South Park is really going for good taste anyway, but there are a couple moments, and I have very high threshold
Tolerance.
for going over the line, but the abortion mini game was one of those things, and I know that was something that was removed, but I believe my understanding is that the way they removed it is only to basically put up a notice that this was removed.
But then describing it in graphic detail.
Right. Is that how they did it? Mm-hmm. Because that's really interesting to me.
Like, this was taken out and it has like a picture of, I think somebody with their hand cupped in their head, but then it has a written, very in-depth description of the scene that is taken out in this case.
Yeah. So that was one of the things, is the abortion mini game shows up twice in that game, and it's shocking to me both times. And the other one comes, but I'm still laughing because I do think that South Park can be pretty subversive, and so it's gross, but I did laugh a little bit. But then there was there's a thing towards the very end where it's just a setting, and it's an internal setting. It's inside a human body that it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross. And my stomach actually churned a couple times going through that particular level.
There's a specific achievement that you can only get in that area.
Is there? We'll talk about it later.
So, like, the thing that I found two very different things, this was past the point of good taste for me. One is that the NPCs keep repeating the same dialogue when you walk by them. Like, really? That was just... that made my stomach churn.
Yeah, I get it.
Got really sick of that.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, actually, because I feel like the game's getting maybe some inordinately high praise just because and granted it is pretty much a playable South Park movie,
episode,
essentially. I mean, even beyond episode. I mean, it covers a lot of ground. But I think that once you really start looking past some of that stuff, that actually there's a lot of disappointing stuff in there too for me. And that's one of those things is that, hey, they more or less say the same thing. There's a few things that to me set up the possibility of a real choice that mattered, and then it doesn't matter. It was really shocking to me when that choice didn't matter. And I secretly, and I would like to know the inside story, but I secretly suspect that there was a point where they were going to have essentially a branching path at that point and having two very different long-term scenarios play out depending on that choice, and then they probably weren't able to do that.
And they had a very troubled development as well, where it was shut down basically, and then the rights were bought to it later on. THQ, which owned it originally, and then went bankrupt.
Yeah.
But one of the other problems that I have with the game is that you can't skip some of the animations and cutscenes that come along. But it's a game like that. It just does so many regular, like it does really well when it has a joke that could only have been done, like when they really subvert your expectations.
They do a really good job
like,
sometimes of that too.
I maybe as a very light spoiler, one of the first things that you do is you put in your character's name, which is a very normal thing to do in an RPG. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, okay, here's my name, and then Cartman says, all right, douchebag, is that your name? And then like that's
you go
subverting
to push the button. And then there's nothing you can do. Like you think you're about to enter your name, and then nothing happens, and he just calls you douchebag. And then from there on, you start being called like Commander Douchebag and Sir Douchebag, and it's
sort of reminds me of an old running You Don't Know Jack gag, where if you didn't type in a name in You Don't Know Jack, the host would just make up a usually kind of nasty name for you.
Yeah. And it did remind me too a little bit of like the humor and say like Portal 2 at the very beginning has that moment where it's like press A to do something and then you jump,
and then
and then he just keeps making fun of you for jumping over and over again.
Yeah.
And then Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon did something very similar, which is press jump to jump. And some stuff like that with its tutorial. So it does some stuff like that, and there's some other stuff. There's a whole thing where it makes fun of audio logs. There's this whole bit where you find audio logs that are nothing but making fun of audio logs through an audio log, and it's really, really funny. So, I mean, it's easy to think about South Park. And it's funny because I got some tweets about this saying, clearly you don't like South Park or think South Park is funny or whatever. And it's like, no, actually, I really like South Park, and I think South Park is funny. And I praised it for being funny and more than just fart jokes. And again, it was really weird when somebody said, you must think that South Park is nothing but fart jokes. And so you didn't read the thing, did you?
Also, there are a lot of fart jokes in that game.
There are a lot of fart jokes in that game. So yes, I think even if I did think that, I could be forgiven for thinking that South Park was a bunch of fart jokes. But
it runs into the same problem that other funny games run into. Like, I don't know if you'd played Matt Hazard, which had Will Arnett as the voice.
I have not played it, but the complaint I've always heard about that game is that, well, it mocks bad level design in games, but
it has terrible level design.
Right, exactly. So, making jokes about something in your game being bad doesn't make it okay that that thing in your game is bad or isn't fun.
Yeah, like when guys throw grenades at you and they're like, "Moo, I wish I could pick those grenades up." You're like, "Yeah, I wish I could pick the grenades up like I do in every other game." Just you realizing that this was terrible doesn't make it funny.
Yeah.
See, but I think that's the difference for South Park is that it didn't it didn't take something out in order to just make a joke about it. It chose things that
No,
I
don't think Matt Hazard took that out. I think they just didn't know how. They were like, "Well, we're out of time.
Right. So they made.
We'll make a joke about it."
They made jokes about things that within the game also fell short of our expectation, which I still think could be funny if done right. But the thing I like about South Park, and the reason I think it gets away with making fun of itself and video games in general, is because it's making fun of things that don't feel like they could have been in the game or should have been in the game.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make fun of bad level design and then make you go through a bad level. You know, it doesn't do like what Duke Nukem Forever does and like have Duke talking about how stupid it is to do like valve turning puzzles and then have valve turning puzzles. You know, in this case you're making fun of audio logs, but you're at the same time actually making it fun to pick up an audio log. So that's actually the opposite way, is you're actually making me want to listen to the audio logs while at the same time making fun of the fact that audio logs are stupid.
But it still has kind of the same fetch quests and kind of long level. Like there are things that could have been done better as a game.
But what I like is that they didn't make fun of the fact that you were then basically going out on a bunch of fetch quests. As far as I remember,
Yeah, no, not so
I don't
much.
remember any like prolonged jokes about you're just going on a fetch quest or you're going on. In fact, some of that stuff felt kind of subtle to me. Like, and bear with me, there's this whole thing at the beginning. One of the first things you do is that you have to go out and get your crew. Mm-hmm. And that is a very tropey thing, but it felt to me like it's almost like this sort of subtle nod to Mass Effect 2 or to whatever, like games where you go out and you have to get your crew together to go out and perform your main quest. Like it didn't go out of its way to mention that that's what you were doing. It is what it was, and I think it's smart that the game didn't go out of its way to mention that that's what you were actually doing is being Commander Shepard, more or less. So, yeah. But on the other hand, the game's still pretty shallow, and it's still like. And my problem was never that I don't expect every game to be long or to be hard or long and hard. Anyway, I don't expect games to be those things necessarily. But it did strike me as though I could mostly sleepwalk my way through the combat most of the time, as long as you hit the button when you need to hit the button, twirl the stick when you need to twirl the stick. It's all whatever.
Well, it's Paper Mario battle. It's like
it's
but
like
those can be
Those are
challenging at times. I mean, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is not a cakewalk. The boss fights can still be difficult and engaging. You want to be thoughtful about some of the skills you're using, the equipment that you have, and so on.
And I think games can be easy and be great. I mean, I love
Absolutely.
Okami, and Okami's easy.
Yeah.
And I love the Lego games, and they're typically very easy. But again, there came a moment where it's like, I wish they would have done a little bit more with this thing. Like, I wish that they would have done a little bit more with the leveling up. Like, for example, as long as you are wearing more or less the highest level, one of the highest level things you can get, and as long as you put in, it almost didn't matter to me which patches and which strap-ons I chose. It was just like a whatever thing, and I was still able to go through. And
if you have the right patches on, it makes things even more ridiculously easy.
Yeah,
which is kind of nice.
It's kind of nice, but then on the other hand, I didn't like that I didn't have to really think about that stuff. It would have been nice to actually. Go into those menus.
That's part of what makes an RPG like that rewarding, is that kind of involvement and thinking about the equipment and skills and so on that you're using. And so in this, it just seems.
This is actually why I didn't play this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you want it to still be. It would have been great if it was a great RPG on top of being a great South Park.
The RPG elements felt a little more divorced from the comedy than any part of the rest of the game. Like, it was very much a game. Like, I'm going to inflict bleeding on a character, or I'm going to make a guy grossed out. Like, grossed out, kind of South Parky, but all the rest is like, no, I need the fire.
Because you can throw poop at them to gross them out.
But getting like a burning
poop.
staff of whatever, like, oh, this is all super. It's fine, but it's just a video game
too. Like, even in the menus, like if you use a health potion, it's still called a health potion. If you go into the menu, you'll see that health potion. Oops, I'm doing it again. Sorry. So you'll see that the health potion is actually, cheesy poofs or whatever. But then, it's still called health potion because really all they're doing. But this is actually something I really liked about that game is that even the trash, like the vendor trash, is all really interesting. So you can go and just sell it all at once like vendor trash. But I like that it's all listed and all of it it all has different names and different references to episodes and different South Park things. So it made me happy to actually go and look at what trash I was selling as I sold it.
A lot of it was very inside, though. Like, I felt like if you didn't watch South Park, most of it would just be completely, you would just, right over your head.
I think that's okay, though.
I think that's okay in this case.
Who's getting
that
into
is
this?
not a South Park viewer is going to have any interest in playing this game anyway.
But I think that's why people are tending to love it, is because that's what it nails. I mean, without the South Park thing, I think it would be probably relatively derided as a simple, shallow game that's, pretty much just shrug-worthy, you're done, and you never think about it again. But it's the South Parkiness that makes it so good, and hopefully I got across in my review that it's a game, but as a South Park thing. But this is what I wonder too, and this takes me on to one more thing. Maybe then we'll just close things down because I'm getting off into tangents left and right. But I kind of wonder about things like anime games like Dragon Ball and Naruto and things like that come out, because people eat that stuff up.
Not our readers.
Not our readers, but people, especially Japanese folks, like, they'll eat that stuff up. That stuff sells gangbusters in Japan.
That's racist.
And shut up. You're racist. Your mom's racist.
She is.
Yeah.
No, she really is.
We'll talk about that later. So anyway, but I kind of wonder, like, when you have a game that really nails the universe, and, for somebody like us who's maybe not, it's not so much part of the cultural zeitgeist, for say a critic over here as it might be for a critic elsewhere, I kind of wonder if it's sort of the same thing. Are we more forgiving of South Park? Were critics more forgiving of South Park because it is part of our cultural zeitgeist, and it is something that, that we're more or less fine with this being a playable episode of South Park? How much are we missing in something like a Dragon Ball Z fighting game, where we're more likely to look at this from its mechanical perspective and not from its, as somebody who hasn't watched every episode of Dragon Ball and every iteration of Dragon Ball. I kind of wonder.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. It seems to me that a lot of those games don't do the kind of original writing and world building and everything that the South Park game does. A lot of them will just sort of trot out all of the characters and maybe retread storylines from the animes and sort of rely on that to appeal to fans, as opposed to, where South Park it's completely original content, right? It's all new writing, it's a new experience, a new storyline in that world, new humor, new jokes.
Like, you could literally feel like everything that you experience in Stick of Truth is a movie of South Park.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a point, whereas something like the Dragon Ball or the Naruto games, like, that story mixed up with some fighting that I guess is related to the game, but that's not...
It's more or less, hey, remember that thing?
It's more that it looks like the game,
Yeah.
or looks like the show. It looks like Naruto or Dragon Ball, rather than, captures the feel of it.
Also, I mean, the South Park game was made by Trey Stone and Matt Parker.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's true too. Instead of farmed out to somebody who's just taking pre-existing, narrative things and just doing whatever, right? So, but
or in a lot of those games, literally, they're just, like Kara was saying, literally doing the same thing that the show's already done. It would be like if we watched season 1 of South Park the game. Like, well, that would be interesting, but much less fun.
So we should probably wrap things up. It's going almost on 4:15, and I told Dan that we'd probably try to be for an hour, so we went a little over. But so I want to say, first of all, thank you for putting up with us on a less structured version of GameSpot gameplay this week. I lost 2 people I'd hoped to have on, and we've been all so busy. I'm playing a thing. Tom's playing a thing. I think we can say, I don't think that there are any... Well, I won't say about what Tom's playing. I'll say what I'm playing. I'm playing Yaiba, Ninja Gaiden Z. I don't think there are any restrictions on me being able to say I'm playing that. So all is good with that.
Fired, Kevin.
But no, it's fine. And I will, obviously have more to say to that next week. But also GDC is next week, and a lot of people are planning that. And people should, hang around for GameSpot coverage, because we'll have a lot to say during GDC, as well as... there are going to be reveals next week and all sorts of interesting things that happen during GDC week but aren't necessarily part of GDC, if that makes sense. A lot of companies take the opportunity to make announcements and drop the mic on whatever
Well,
And
special guests coming
special
by.
guest. There is a special guest coming by next week on GameSpot Gameplay, and you will then see a return to form for us because the special guest inspires some music quizzes for me. So I'll leave that be for now. But thank you to everybody out there, and thank you to people here. Carolyn Pettit. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You should follow Carolyn on Twitter. It's Carolyn Michelle.
Yes, it is.
And you should follow Justin Haywald as well.
I would disagree with that. You should never, ever follow me
You
on
should
Twitter.
not follow Justin Haywald as @JustinHaywald. You should definitely follow me at FiddleCub. I am not afraid to say I think you should follow me. I will not be modest about this, even though my Twitter feed is a mess. And I guess you should also subscribe because in a few days the audio will be up and you should subscribe on iTunes or whatever your favorite RSS reader is. So thank you for joining in. Thanks to the people here, and we'll see you next week on another episode of GameSpot Gameplay.
Yeah.